Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. Tonight's story comes from a man named Murray, 51 years old, from Grande Prairie, Alberta, by way of Fort McMurray. 26 years on drilling crews in the oil patch. Derrick hand, then driller, running his own shift. Big fella. Polite to the point of being annoying about it, he says. The kind of guy who apologizes when you step on his foot. Murray's been in the Philippines for over 5 years now. Bohol, mostly. And when he agreed to sit down and tell us all of this, he said something we haven't heard on this channel before. He said nobody stole from him. Nobody lied to him. Nobody ran a scam on him. And that's exactly what he wants to talk about. Because Murray came here carrying something he hadn't told a single person back home. Not his crew, not his sister, nobody. He came here to get away from it. And what he found instead was a family who fed him on a concrete floor and treated him like a king. A woman who spent 11 months not asking him for a thing, and a house with his money in it and somebody else's name on the paper. This one's going to sit with you for a while. It sat with us. Quick thing before we start. After hearing so many of these stories on this channel, we put together a guide covering what we've learned from them. The practical stuff. The questions people wish they'd asked. It's linked in the description if you want it. All right, here's Murray's story, in his own words. So, the thing about the patch is, nobody asks you anything. That's the part people don't get. You're in camp 2 weeks straight, 12-hour shifts, minus 38 outside and the diesel's gelling up. And you're eating powdered eggs beside a guy you've worked next to for 4 years, and you don't know if he's got kids. Might not know his last name. That's not sad. That's the arrangement. You do your shift, you go to your room, you watch something on your laptop, you sleep. And I liked it. That's the thing I have to be honest about. I liked it for 26 years. Started in '98, Fort Mac, 19 years old and dumber than a bag of hammers. Worked my way up. Derrick hand for a long stretch, which if you don't know, is the guy up in the monkey board racking pipe, 70 feet up in the dark with everything frozen, then driller. Last 6 years I ran my own shift out of Grande Prairie. I was good at it. I don't say much good about myself, so let me have this one. I was good. There's a thing that happens on a rig floor when something starts going sideways. You can feel it in the sound before the gauges tell you. And the crew looks somewhere. Sometimes they look at the tool pusher. On my rig, they looked at my hands. 26 years. And that's the only thing I ever earned that I'd call an accomplishment. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Do that for 2 decades. Big checks, truck, house payments, whatever. But there's nothing to spend it on in camp. And I wasn't married, never was, and so it just piled up. Not because I'm clever with money. Because I had no life to spend it into. There's a difference, and it took me until about 2 years ago to understand which one I was. By 2019, I had $340,000. Yeah. No. That's real. That's what a guy with no wife and no hobbies looks like after 20 years of shift work. And then a fella I knew, friend of a friend, guy who'd been a mud engineer and got out, came back around wearing better boots than he used to. He had this thing, private fund, oil services, servicing the same companies I'd been working for my whole life, which was the part that got me, because I understood it. Or I thought I did. He said, "Murray, it's the same money you're making now, except you sleep through it. I put in all of it. Not most. All. 340 grand, one wire, on a Tuesday. And I remember I went and got a coffee after at the Tim's on 100th, and I felt like a businessman. That's the honest word for it. I felt like a guy who'd finally figured something out. I'm not going to drag you through the next 18 months. It went sideways in 2020, which everything went sideways in 2020. Oil went negative. The whole world sat down. There was no fraud. I want to be clear, because people always want there to be a villain. Lawyer looked at it for me and said, "There's nothing here, Murray. It's just bad paper and worse timing." Guy stopped answering, not in a criminal way, in a way where he just sort of stopped existing. I got $11,000 back. The lawyer took a chunk of that. And here's where I did the thing that actually broke me, and it wasn't the money. I didn't tell anybody. Not one person. Not my sister in Red Deer. Not my mother, who was still alive then. Not a single guy on my crew. I got up the next hitch, and I drove out to the lease. And I worked, and I kept working. And for 3 years, I was a man on a rig who everybody thought had money. You have to understand what that does. Roughnecks talk about money constantly. It's the only thing there is to talk about. And I had this reputation, right? Murray's careful. Murray's got a nest egg. Murray doesn't blow it on sleds and boats like the rest of you idiots. So the young guys would come to me, sit down across the table in the camp kitchen with their first big check burning a hole in them and go, "Hey, Murray, what would you do with 50 grand?" And I'd tell them. I'd sit there, and I'd give them advice. Careful, sensible, don't be stupid advice. With nothing in the bank. Every hitch, 3 years. That's what hollowed me out. Not the loss, the performance. You can survive losing money. Losing money is just a number going down. But pretending, every single day, that you're the man everyone thinks you are, while you're actually a guy who lost everything to a handshake, that gets into you. That's a thing you do to yourself. Anyway, end of 2020, the rigs slowed right down, and they offered packages, and I took mine. 51 years old. Well, 46 then. Whatever. Took the package, sold the truck, cashed a chunk of the RRSP because, at that point, what was I saving for? Ended up with about 40 grand, all in, and a rented room and absolutely no idea what a Tuesday was supposed to be for. There was a hand on my crew named Lorne, married a Filipina, and honest to God, that man could not go 4 minutes without saying the word Bohol. Bohol this, Bohol that. My wife's family's from Bohol. $20 a day, Murray. Warm all year. Nobody bothers you. That's it. That's my research. That's the whole thing. People ask me what drew me to the Philippines like I studied it, like I compared it against Thailand or Costa Rica or wherever. No, it was the only place I'd ever heard of that wasn't Alberta. It's like when you've been driving all night and you pull off the highway and you eat at the first place with the lights on. You don't pick it. You just stop. February 2021. Landed in Manila, connected to Tagbilaran, walked out of that little airport into air like a wet blanket and thought, well, nobody here knows me. That was the whole appeal. Nobody here knows me. Took me about 4 years to work out. That was also the problem. February 2021, and the Philippines wasn't really open yet. I don't know how much you remember about that stretch, but getting in took paperwork I still don't fully understand. Travel Authority Certificate. Quarantine hotel in Manila. 6 nights. In a room where the window didn't open, and the aircon dripped onto the carpet in the same spot until there was a stain the shape of Saskatchewan. They brought food to the door on a tray. I watched the whole run of a show about people restoring old motorcycles, and I never once thought about what I was doing. Then the little turboprop over to Tagbilaran, and out onto the tarmac, and it was, okay. So, 34 degrees, which is nothing to a lot of people. But I'd flown out of Grande Prairie in February. It was -29 when I left. 50-some degrees of difference in about 30 hours. Getting off that plane felt like walking into a laundry room. And the island was empty. Everybody talks about Bohol like it's a Lona Beach full of divers and Australians. Not then. The resorts were shut or half shut. Whole rows of dive shops with the shutters down and the paint going chalky. Panglao was quiet enough that you could hear the water from the road. Tricycle drivers waiting in a line 12 long for maybe 2 customers all afternoon. It was, honestly, the perfect place for a guy who wanted to not be looked at. I found a room in Dawes, just over the causeway. Second floor of a concrete house. Landlady named Ma'am Feely, P7,000 a month, which is about 170 Canadian. Cold shower, which I didn't mind, and a ceiling fan that made a clicking noise, which I did. Rooster started up around 4. Not one rooster. There is never one rooster. It's a relay system. And when the last one finishes, the first one starts again. And I've been here 5 years, and I still don't know what they're all so worked up about. Bought a scooter for P46,000 second-hand. Call it $1,100. A Honda Beat. I want you to picture this properly. I'm 6'3", and I was 240 at the time. That scooter has the wheels of a shopping cart. I looked like a bear on a unicycle, and the local guys never got tired of it. And fair enough, I wouldn't have either. So, money. Let's be straight about it, because I don't want anybody thinking I turned up here rich. I had about 40,000 Canadian. That's it. That's the severance, plus what was left of an RRSP I'd gutted and paid the tax on like an idiot, plus the truck money. 40 grand and no pension coming for another 14 years, because I was 46, not 66. People assume every guy out here is drawing something. I wasn't drawing anything. I was drawing down. And my plan? I use that word loosely. My plan went about 4 months out. Live cheap. Figure something out. That's the whole document. I wasn't healing. I want to say that clearly, because I've heard other fellas out here talk about their healing journey, and I always want to ask them how that's going for them. I wasn't healing. I was hiding. There's a difference, and the difference is whether you're doing anything. Now, the thing that actually shocked me, first few months, it wasn't the poverty. I'd braced for that, and it's real, don't get me wrong, but I'd seen rough in Canada too. Up north, reserves and river valleys. It exists everywhere, and I wasn't going to be one of those guys who gets off a plane and discovers the world. What got me was the volume. Everybody here belongs to somebody. I'd go to the market in Tagbilaran, and a woman selling calamansi would ask me, inside a minute and a half, I'm not exaggerating, where I was from, was I married, how many kids, and how was my mother? My mother. A total stranger. And she'd wait for the answer. 26 years I'd worked in camps full of men who wouldn't ask you the time. You'd sit across from a guy eating powdered eggs at 5 in the morning, and neither of you would say a word for the length of the meal. And that was considered a normal, healthy, respectful interaction. I once did a full 6-month run beside a fella I only ever knew as Whitey, and I could not tell you a single thing about his life. So, you come from that, to a place where the sari-sari store lady knows your washing schedule, where every house has 10 people in it, and half of them are cousins from somewhere else, and nobody thinks that's crowded, where there's a basketball court in every single barangay, no matter how poor, and it's got a roof on it even when the houses don't. It undid something in me, and I mean that both ways, good and bad, both. It undid something. The expat crowd I found in about week 3, because you always do. There's a bar on the road toward Alona with plastic chairs and a TV playing PBA games, and a table out front that had the same 4 or 5 guys at it every afternoon from about 2 o'clock. Brit, couple of Americans, an Aussie who'd been here 19 years. I sat with them maybe 6 or 7 times total, and I never went back. They were the most miserable men I have ever been around, and I've worked winter shifts on a stuck drill string. every one of them on his second or third or fourth Filipina, and every one of them absolutely certain that the problem was the women. All of them. Every one. Mate. They'll bleed you. Wait till the family shows up. Wait till the brother needs a motorbike. There's always a brother. That's a direct quote, that last bit. Word for word. There's always a brother. And I sat there with my San Miguel getting warm. And I thought, you sad bastards. You've all been here a decade. You hate it. Why are you still here? Nobody's holding you. So I wrote them off. All of it. The whole table, the whole warning, the entire body of information. Filed under. Noise of unhappy men. I want to be careful how I say this next part, because 1,000 not about to tell you those blokes were right. They weren't. They were bitter and lazy, and most of what they said was garbage. But they weren't wrong about everything, and I threw out everything, because it all came in the same box. That's on me. That's a decision I made in a plastic chair in 2021. Anyway, September. Jollibee in Tagbilaran, the one near the plaza. I'd been going because it was air-conditioned and I could sit there an hour for the price of a coffee, and because after 7 months of eating rice from a carinderia, my body wanted something wrong with it. I was in the line and I could not read the menu board. Not the language. It's in English, mostly. I just didn't know what any of it was. Ordered something with a picture. Palabok. Which is fine. It's noodles. It's orange. There's a shrimp on it. But I clearly had no idea what I'd done, and the woman ahead of me turned around and watched me discover it, and just laughed. Out loud. Not politely. Rosalie. 38. Barangay health worker. Which means she does the immunizations and the weigh-ins and the checking on the old people, riding a beat-up Yamaha over roads that aren't roads. Eldest of 6. Had a 9-year-old boy, Kiko. Had a job. Had a schedule that did not have a lot of room in it for a large Canadian. And here's what I noticed right away, sitting there with my orange noodles. She didn't match anything. Not one item off that table at the bar. She wasn't 22. She wasn't stunning. She was, I'd say, handsome. She'd hate that. She's got a face that's mostly cheekbones and skepticism. She had her own money coming in, and she paid for her own meal, and then she left, because she had somewhere to be. 3 months, we went on with it. Slowly. Coffee at a place by the port. A ferry over to Cebu once. She'd let me pay maybe 1 time in 3, and she'd argue about it. Actually argue. In front of people. And somewhere early in there she said a thing to me, unprompted. Nobody had asked. She said she wasn't looking for a foreigner to fix anything. I've thought about that sentence more times than I could count. At the time I heard it as reassurance. It wasn't. It was information. So here's the part where one have to explain how I ended up spending my Saturdays holding a cooler of vaccines. Rosalie's job, barangay health worker, BHW they call it, is not what I thought a job was. She'd get a schedule from the rural health unit, and then she'd ride out to whatever barangay was on it, with a plastic tub of supplies bungee corded behind her on the Yamaha. Immunizations, weighing babies, blood pressure on the old folks, checking whether the pregnant girls in the far sitios had been in yet, and if they hadn't, going and getting them. The roads out toward the interior, Sikatuna Way, up past Lobak and inland, some of them are concrete, and then the concrete just stops, mid-length, like the money ran out on a Tuesday afternoon. After that, it's mud and rock, and the kind of grade where you can smell your own clutch. I started going along because she mentioned once that the supply crates were heavy, and I am, if nothing else, a large object. That's the whole qualification. I have no medical training. I can lift things, and I can fix a small engine, and it turns out that in a barangay with 400 people, that makes you basically staff. So I'd carry the tub, hold the umbrella over the folding table when the rain came in sideways for 11 minutes, and then stopped. Get handed somebody's baby while the mother filled out a form, which I've never held a baby in my life. I'm 46 years old at this point. No kids, no nieces close by. First time somebody put one in my arms, I stood there like I'd been handed a live wire, and about 9 women watched me and laughed themselves stupid. Sundays, she went to Mass. San Agustin in Panglao, or the one closer, depending. I went with her. Let me be clear, I do not believe in it. I was raised sort of vaguely United Church, in the sense that we went at Christmas, and my mother liked the hymns. I sat in those pews for a year and a half, and never once felt anything from above. But what I felt was, okay, you've got a concrete church, no aircon, doors open, 3 ceiling fans going, everyone sweating through their good shirts, and 150 people saying the same thing at the same time. Kids sitting on the floor in the aisles because there's no room. Somebody's phone going off. And when it's over, nobody leaves. They stand outside in the heat and talk for 45 minutes. I'd spent 26 years in a job where the highest form of togetherness was 2 guys not saying anything in a truck. The boy took longer. Kiko was 9, and he had absolutely no use for me for about 4 months, which I respected. Smart kid. Some enormous foreigner turns up around your mother. You don't hand out trust on day 1. What cracked it was a basketball hoop. There was a court in her neighborhood. There is a court in every neighborhood. I've never once been anywhere in this country without hearing a ball bouncing. And the backboard on it had rotted through and the ring was hanging on 1 bolt. I got some marine ply and a can of paint, P2 800 all in, call it $70, and spent a Saturday up a borrowed ladder in about 90% humidity redoing it. Kiko didn't say thanks. He just started playing there, and then, eventually, he started asking me to rebound for him, which for a 9-year-old is basically a marriage proposal. Now, here's the part one've never told anybody until this, and it doesn't make me look good. I was keeping a ledger. Not on paper. In my head. From about week 2, every single time we were together, some part of my brain was standing off to the side with a clipboard going, okay, here it comes. Now she'll ask. Any minute now. And I did things. Small things. I'm embarrassed to be saying them out loud. I left cash out. Deliberately. There was one time I put about $4,000 in a fold on the little table in my room in Dallas, right where you'd see it walking to the bathroom, and left it there over a weekend. She stayed. Counted it after. Same. I mentioned money that didn't exist. Told her once, sort of offhand, that I had some investments back home doing all right, which was a lie so specific and so pathetic that I actually felt sick about it in the shower afterward, because I was using the exact same words that guy used on me in 2019, just pointing them at a woman who worked for Pax 1,000 a month. She didn't do anything with it, didn't ask a follow-up, changed the subject to a dog that had been hanging around the health center. 11 months. That's how long it went with her asking me for nothing. Not a peso, not a phone load, nothing. And by about month 8, I'd flipped completely over to the other side of it. I was the one fighting to pay. She'd argue with me in front of the cashier at a Mang Inasal over a P180 bill. Genuinely argue, hand on my wrist, that whole thing about how I always pay, it's not right, and me standing there like a big idiot holding a 500 note going, Rosalie, it's chicken. Somewhere in there I stopped waiting for the ask. Just stopped. Put down the clipboard. I've thought a lot about that, and I think what actually happened is I didn't relax. I converted. I went from suspicious to certain, and I skipped over the part in the middle where you're just paying attention. Meanwhile, I was learning things about how it works here, mostly by getting them wrong. Utang na loob is the one that took me longest. Everyone translates it as debt of gratitude. And that's accurate, but it doesn't tell you anything useful. Best I can put it in my own terms. It's a debt you cannot pay off. And the reason you can't pay it off is that trying to pay it off is an insult. On a rig, if a guy covers your shift, you cover his. Square. Done. Nobody owes anybody, and that's the point. Being square is the goal. Here, being square is nothing. Being square means you're strangers. The debt is the relationship. You're supposed to owe each other permanently in both directions, and the owing is what makes you family. That's not a trap. I want to say that plainly because people watch these videos and want it to be a trap. It's a genuinely more beautiful system than the one I came from. It also has no brakes on it, and I was a man arriving from a country that runs entirely on brakes. Around March 2022, she took me inland to meet the family. Bahay Kubo mostly, with a concrete front section somebody had started and not finished. Rebar still sticking up out of the pillars, which you see everywhere here. Houses waiting for a son abroad to send the next payment. Tin roof, karaoke from 2 houses overdoing My Way at 11 in the morning. Her mother, Nanay Luz. 4 siblings scattered, 2 in Cebu, 1 in Tagbilaran, 1 still home. And the youngest, Jomar, 17, sharp as a tack, wanted to be a nurse, had already worked out exactly which school in Cebu and exactly what it cost, and told me all of it inside 20 minutes because 17-year-olds don't know they're not supposed to. And Tatay Berting, 68. Kidneys packing it in. They fed me lechon manok and rice and something with jackfruit in it, and they put me in the only good chair, and I ate off a plate while some of them ate standing up. I sat on their floor later with a beer, and I have never in my life been treated like that by people who had that little. The dialysis situation I got in pieces over months, never once from Rosalie directly. Twice a week at a center in Tagbilaran. PhilHealth covers a portion, and then there's the part it doesn't cover, and the medicines, and the transport, and the days he can't, and they skip one and he goes gray. August 2022. I did the arithmetic myself and offered. P18,000 a month, about 430 Canadian. She said no. Flat no, twice. And then a third time with her jaw set. I offered again the next week, and I said something like, I'm not doing it for the family. I'm doing it because I can't sit at your table and watch this. She cried, which she doesn't. Said yes. And then apologized to me, on and off, for about a week. Actual apologies, like she'd done something. And she said one thing that I have replayed more than anything else in 5 years. She said, if you start, they will never let you stop. Not because they are bad, because they will love you. I heard that as a compliment. I sent the first payment on a Thursday from a Gcash counter next to a Mercury drug, and I walked back out into that heat, feeling something I hadn't felt since the last time I stood on a rig floor and knew exactly what I was doing. Best money I ever spent. I still say that. I'd send it again tomorrow. So the dialysis went in as a fixed line, and I treated it like one. That's how a driller thinks, if you want to know. You've got your consumables, your fuel, your fluids, and you've got a daily burn rate, and the whole job is knowing your burn rate. Anybody can drill a hole. Knowing what the hole costs per meter is the actual job. So I sat down at Ma'am Feely's plastic table with a pen and the back of an envelope, which is the only accounting software I have ever used, and I worked it out. P18,000 a month for the old man. My own living, all in, Rent and fuel and food and the internet? About 20,000. So call it P38,000 a month total, which at the time was about 900 Canadian, against roughly $31,000 in the account. 34 months. Not quite 3 years. And I remember looking at that number and thinking, yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. 3 years is loads of time. Something'll turn up. I want to be really precise about this because it's the only genuinely clever bit of thinking I did in 5 years, and I did it once and then never again. I never redid that math. Not once. Not for 16 months. I set the burn rate, and then I stopped reading the gauge, which on a rig is how you kill people. November 2022, Jamar started nursing in Cebu. $65,000 a semester. About 1,550 Canadian. Plus board with a second cousin in Mandaue. Plus the uniforms. Plus a laptop. Because you cannot do nursing school now without one. $26,000 for a second-hand Acer from a place in Robinson's, 620 odd. And here is the thought I had. I want you to hear it in full, because it's the single dumbest thing that's ever been inside my head. And I've had a wrench dropped on my head from 40 feet. I thought, this is the exit. Genuine. I sat there, and I thought, right. So the boy graduates in 4 years, and Philippine nurses go to the States, or Saudi, or Ireland, and they send money home, and then this family has an earner, and then they won't need me. I actually thought I was buying my way out. Yeah, I told a fella that, about a year ago, and he laughed so hard he had to put his beer down. Anyway, somewhere in that same stretch, the names changed. First year and a half, I was Rosalie's boyfriend. Then it was Kuya Murray, Kuya's older brother. It's respect. It's warm. I liked it. Then it slid to Tito, uncle, which is also warm, but Tito is structural. Tito is a position in the org chart. And then it went past even that, into the thing where nobody calls you anything. They just tell you. Not ask. Tell. As in, Tito, the pump at the back house is finished. Tito, the school is asking for the uniform money by Friday. Not a request with a question mark on the end. Just a report of a situation. Delivered to the person whose department that is. And it stopped coming from Rosalie. That's the Part 1/500 flag, if I could talk to myself in 2022. In year 1, everything came through her, and she'd fight me about it. By early 2023, the requests were arriving from all over. A cousin I'd met twice at a birthday. No Noy, another cousin, about a fishing thing that never happened. The barangay captain, who came around with a folder about a covered court repair, and called me sir the entire time, which I hated. There was a woman at church, and I want to stress I had spoken to this woman on 2 occasions, total, and one of those was about parking. She got my number from somebody and messaged me about her daughter's tuition. P12,000. I sent it. Of course I sent it. What was I going to do? Message a stranger back from a Catholic church in a small town and say, no? Fiesta season nearly finished me. If you haven't been here for one, every barangay has a fiesta. And there's about 40 barangays in the municipality, and you get invited to a lot of them once people know your name. And you don't just show up, you contribute. 5,000 here, 3,000 there, a case of Red Horse, a whole roast pig one time because I'd said yes, without knowing the unit of measurement. Then the baptism. They asked me to be Ninong, godfather. And I said yes, because in Canada, being a godfather means you turn up in a suit, you hold the kid awkwardly over a font, and then twice a year you send a card with $50 in it. That is not what it means here. Ninong means you're financially in that child's life. Christmas, birthdays, school, and if things go badly for that family, you. It's a role. It's a permanent institutional position, and I accepted it in about 4 seconds in a kitchen while eating pancit. I found out what it actually meant about 5 months later from a Dutch guy at a hardware store in Tagbilaran, who watched my face and said, "Oh, mate, how many?" 3, by then. 3 godchildren. Here's the thing that made it impossible to see clearly. Nobody ever, one time, told me a number to my face. Money was discussed with me constantly, and never to me. It came pre-chewed. It had arrived through 2 or 3 people first. An aunt would mention something to Rosalie's mother. The mother would say it in front of a cousin. The cousin would say it to me on the way to somewhere. Sideways. Laughing. Like it was gossip. By the time it got to me, it wasn't a request anymore. It was already a fact everyone had agreed on, and I was just the last one to be informed. And nobody will tell you no, either. Ask if something's affordable, and it's affordable. Ask if you're doing too much, and you're not. Oh, no. You are so kind. Saving face runs in both directions, and it means the true number is never said out loud by anyone. Not to insult you, to protect everybody. You can drown in that. Politely. Over about 18 months. Around May 2023, I got the feeling. I was at the Gcash counter, same one, next to the mercury drug, and I'd just sent something. And I walked out into the heat and the diesel. And I got this specific sensation in my chest that I recognized immediately. Because I'd had it in the winter of 2019, reading an email that didn't quite answer my question. Money going out in a direction I couldn't see the end of. And do you know what I did with that feeling? I put it away. Consciously. I felt it, identified it, and put it in a drawer. Because opening it meant sitting down with the woman I loved and asking a direct question, and I have never in my life been able to do that. I did try, twice. Once in the kitchen, once on the ferry back from Cebu. I asked her what it was actually costing, all in, everything, monthly, total. And both times she did this thing, kind, not cold, she'd touch my arm, and she'd say something like, "Why are you thinking about that now?" And then she'd tell me something about Kiko, or about a patient, and the conversation would just have moved. Gently, like a car being pushed into another lane, twice. That's it. 2 attempts in 16 months, and I let both of them go. And I told myself she was being sweet. Summer of 2023, I went back to Alberta for a rotation. 12 weeks, a contract outfit near Fox Creek, working under a fella 15 years younger than me who had absolutely no idea who I used to be. I told everybody here it was for a visa reset, which was rubbish. My tourist extensions were fine. I went because I'd run the numbers again, first time since 2022, and found about $8,000 sitting where 31 had been. Netted around $14,000 after tax and flights. Came back in October with just over 21 grand in the account and a bad shoulder and a jar of Tim Hortons coffee as pasalubong, which nobody knew what to do with. Nobody in Bohol ever asked why I'd gone. Nobody in Alberta ever asked where I'd been. That's twice now I've done that, if you're keeping count. Gone quiet and gone to work rather than say a true thing out loud to a person who loved me. My mother died on the 11th of January, 2024. Stroke in the kitchen, and my sister found her about 2 hours after. I flew out of Tagbilaran the next morning, and it took me 31 hours door to door, and I arrived in Red Deer in a jacket I'd bought at the airport in Manila because I no longer owned a coat. Think about that for a second. 49 years old, born in Alberta, and I had to buy a coat in a tropical country to attend my own mother's funeral. 11 days I was home. My sister Dana and I hadn't seen each other in 4 years. She's got 2 kids, teenagers, and I'd missed the entire stretch where they turn from children into people. The boy shook my hand, shook it, formally, like I was somebody from the bank. And what I mostly remember about those 11 days is that nobody knew what to ask me. Because what do you say? So, Murray, how's the Philippines? And what am I going to tell them? That I hold umbrellas at vaccination drives, and I've got 3 godchildren, and there's a man on dialysis in a Bahay Kubo who calls me anak? That's not an answer that fits at a reception in a church basement in Red Deer with the egg sandwiches and the urn of nabob. So I said, it's warm. I said, it's cheap. And they nodded and moved on, and I stood there by the coffee being the relative that nobody can place. I didn't tell Dana about the fund. 5 years on, and my own sister still thought I had money because that's what everybody thought, and I'd never corrected a single one of them. And I didn't tell her about Rosalie. Not really. Mentioned a name. Didn't say 4 years. Didn't say I go to Mass. Didn't say I'd been paying for a stranger's kidneys since 2022. Twice in 11 days she gave me an opening. Sat on the back step having a smoke. Said something like, "Are you happy over there, Mur?" And I said, "Yeah." "No, it's good." That's it. That's what I gave her? Yeah. No, it's good. The house went on the market in March and sold in 9 days for way over what any of us thought. Red Deer had done something strange in those years. After the estate got settled and the lawyer got his cut, and Dana took her half, I came away with about $118,000. I want to be honest about what that money felt like, because I don't think I've ever said it properly. It felt like something I'd stolen. Every dollar I'd ever had before that I'd made with my hands, in the cold, in the dark, 70 feet up a derrick. And then my mother dies, and a number appears in an account, and I did absolutely nothing to earn it, except be born to her. I flew back to Bohol in April 2024, with that sitting in a Canadian bank, and I did not feel rich. I felt like I was carrying something radioactive in my pocket, and I did not trust myself with it. Because the last time I'd had a lump of money, I gave the whole thing to a man in better boots than mine. I want you to hold that thought. Because everything that happens next comes out of it. The house wasn't my idea. It also wasn't anybody's idea exactly. It just sort of assembled itself out of the air over about 6 weeks, the way things do here. Tatay Berting was on dialysis twice a week in Tagbilaran, and the family place was up in the interior past Sikatuna, on a road that stops being a road, and every trip in was 90 minutes of him getting shaken to pieces in a multicab. So, a house, closer in, concrete, proper roof, tiled floors, a bathroom with a real toilet, a room for Kiko, room for the mother, P1.4 million, about 33,000 Canadian. And I have to say plainly here, because people watching will assume I was ignorant. I was not ignorant. I knew foreigners cannot own land in the Philippines. I'd known it since about month 3. Everybody knows it. The Dutch guy at the hardware store told me while I was still buying paint for a basketball hoop. It's in the Constitution. Doesn't matter if you're married. Doesn't matter how long you've been here. A condo, yes, up to a point. Land, no, never. And a house sitting on land is part of the land. I asked about it 3 separate times. First time, to Rosalie, in her mother's kitchen. She said we could see a lawyer if I wanted, but the land was titled to her father, and after him, it goes to all 6 of them. So what would I even sign? Second time, to her uncle, who does some surveying work. He explained about a long lease arrangement you can do, 25 years plus renewal. And then he laughed and said, "But Tito, that's for the Germans in Panglao, not for family." Third time, over a beer, to a Filipino-American fella from Cebu who was doing something with a resort. He was the only one who said, "Get it in writing." And I remember thinking, This guy doesn't know these people. And here's the actual reason I never signed anything. And it's not a good reason, but it's a true one. Because to sign, somebody has to sit at a table and produce a document. And that document says, in effect, I do not fully trust you, in front of a family who had fed me off their own plates for 3 years, in a culture where you cannot say a hard thing directly without it landing like a slap. I would have had to be the man who says the uncomfortable thing out loud. You already know what I'm capable of in that department, so I paid in stages, in cash, through Rosalie, to a contractor from Corella. P400,000 to start, 350,000 at the roof. The rest over 8 months, and it went P1.4 million to P1.63 million by the end, which is not corruption. That's just what building does, everywhere on earth. Ask anyone. Call it $39,000. And partway through the build, the other thing. Nonoi. Rosalie's cousin, mid-30s, always had a scheme. Wanted a sari-sari store and a second-hand tricycle to run passengers off the highway junction. $10,000 for the lot. The stock, the shelving, a chest freezer, and the trike. $7,400. And this is the first one I didn't want to pay. I want to be clear about that. The old man's kidneys, no argument, I'd do it again. The boy's nursing school, fine. But this was a business plan from a man who'd never opened a shop, and it came at me the usual way, through 3 people, pre-agreed, arriving as news. I paid it anyway, resentfully. Which is the worst way to give somebody money, because now you've spent it, and you've also got the resentment. And you get to keep the resentment forever. The house finished in December 2024. Blue and white. Tiled floor, 3 bedrooms, a proper CR. Very nice house by any standard around there. I stood in the front room the day they finished, and everybody was taking photos. And Tatai Berting was sitting in the corner in the good chair. And Nanai Luz was crying. And I stood there in a house I had paid every peso for and would never own 1 grain of. And I felt nothing. Not anger, nothing at all. Like a gauge reading 0. Then, March 2025, a Sunday, big lunch, everybody there. And Nonoi, whose store was already in trouble by then, made a joke about the Canadian ATM. In Bisaya mostly, but ATM is ATM in any language. 2 people laughed. Then it went quiet. And Rosalie's face did something I'd never seen it do. That night, on the porch, I heard her going at her mother and her aunt in the kitchen. In Bisaya, fast, low. I only caught a few things, but she was drawing a line. This far, no further. He's not for that. Setting a limit. A limit I had never once set myself. Tatai Berting died on the 19th of April, 2025. Not the kidneys, in the end. Pneumonia. He'd been getting weaker through the wet season, and then it went into his chest, and he was gone in 5 days. He was 71. He'd had 32 months of dialysis that he otherwise wouldn't have had. Twice a week. Every week. And I paid for every one of them. I want to say what that came to, because I've promised you the numbers all the way through. P18,000 a month. 32 months. Plus the meds and the transport that always came on top. Somewhere around 620,000. Call it 14,700 Canadian. 2 things happened in me when he died, and I'm not proud of the second one. The first was grief. Real grief, which surprised me by how physical it was. That man used to make me sit in the good chair and then sit on a stool himself and ask me about snow. Every visit. Tell me again about the snow, Anak. What does it do to the road? He'd never been off Bohol in his life. And the second thing, about 4 days after, sitting on a plastic stool with a warm San Miguel and the wake going on around me, was a thought that arrived fully formed and unwelcome. That's P18,000 a month back. I hated myself for it, Still do a bit. But there it is. And I said I'd be honest. The wake ran 9 days. If you haven't seen a Filipino wake, it's not like ours. It's not an afternoon in a funeral home with squares of cake. The body's in the house, in a glass-topped casket, with lights on it, and people come around the clock. And somebody's always awake with him because you don't leave the dead alone. There's coffee going constantly. There's a tarpaulin up over the yard with his photo printed on it, 6 feet wide, the way they do. Cards in one corner, tongits going all night with the men, and money on the table, and part of that money is technically for the family. Roosters at 4. Someone's karaoke 2 houses down. 3 nights out of 9, because life doesn't stop for anybody. And it costs a fortune. The casket, the tent, the tarpaulin. 9 days of feeding whoever comes, and everybody comes. The novena after, 9 more nights of prayers, and food again on the last one. The tomb, a proper concrete one, built, painted. Then the 40th day, and food again. Total, near as I ever worked out, somewhere north of $280,000. Call it $6,700 for a family whose entire annual household income, all of them, everyone contributing, was maybe half that. I paid about $190,000 of it. Nobody asked me directly. Of course they didn't. And the rest of it turned into a war. Not a shouting war. That's the thing about here. It was conducted entirely in tones of voice, in the next room, in Bisaya, in who sat where, and who got handed the coffee first. Somebody's contribution was late. Somebody's contribution was small. An uncle from Cebu came for 2 days, and left, and the way people said the word Cebu after that, you'd think he'd committed a crime. I sat in the middle of it, understanding maybe 1 word in 9, and knowing exactly what was going on. Night 8, about 2 in the morning. I'd gone out to the porch because I couldn't take the room anymore, and it was that dead-hot still air you get before it rains, and the tarpaulin was flapping a bit at one corner. Auntie Marilu came out, Rosalie's aunt, mother's side, 60-odd, sharp as a razor, ran a little dried fish operation, and had never once in 4 years said more to me than "Good morning, sir." She'd had a bad night in there over money. I'd heard her voice go up twice. And she came and stood by the rail with her arms crossed. And she said, in perfectly good English, because everybody here has perfectly good English when they want to use it, "Do you know they had a meeting about you?" I said, "What?" And she told me. Standing there in the dark. Not because she wanted to hurt me. I've thought about this a lot. But because she was furious with them and I was the thing at hand to hurt them with. Before the house was built. 2024, sometime after I came back from Canada with my mother's money. They sat down. Family council, all of them, the mother, the uncles, her, about what the Canadian could be asked for, and in what order. And Rosalie said no. Marilu was very clear about that. She wasn't defending her. She was complaining about her. Rosalie fought it, hard, more than once, said he is not for that, said he has already given more than anyone should, and she was overruled, because she's the eldest daughter and this family had a father on dialysis and a boy in nursing school and a house with rebar sticking out of it. And then, this is the part, because they knew I'd take it from her and not from them, they gave her the job. Handling me. For 2 years, the woman I loved had been standing between me and her own family, filtering, deciding what got through and what didn't. And she never told me any of it. Not once. Not in 4 years. I want to be really careful here, because I know what this sounds like on a video with a title like this one. It sounds like the twist. It sounds like the bit where I tell you she was in on it. That's not what it was. That's not what I felt on that porch. What I felt was, okay, Have you ever found out somebody carried something heavy for you for years and never said? And you're supposed to be grateful, and you are. And at the same time, it's the worst thing you've ever heard. Because it means every single conversation you had was a conversation where they were working and you were sitting there like a big, happy idiot. She wasn't scamming me. She was protecting me. And to protect me, she had to manage me. And to manage me, she had to lie by leaving things out, every day, for 2 years, on her own, while I sat there congratulating myself on what a good thing we had. That's the thing that got me. Not that she took. That she carried it alone rather than let me see the machinery. I didn't say anything to her that night. Waited 2 days, until after the burial. And it wasn't a fight. I've had exactly one shouting match in my life, and it was on a rig in 2011, and it wasn't even mine. She didn't deny a word of it. Sat on the step with her hands between her knees and confirmed all of it, and then got angry. Really angry, in a way I'd never seen. And not at Marilou. At me. She said, "You never asked. 4 years. Not one time did you ask me a real question and wait for the answer." And then she said the thing I think about most. She said, "Do you know how many times I said no for you? Do you know what they wanted? The land in Ubay? The van? 8 Beth's husband's case. She listed them. There were 7 or 8 things I'd never heard of, any one of which would have taken more than the house did. She'd stopped all of it. Silently. And I'd never once thanked her because I never once knew. Then in June, I did the thing I should have done in 2022. Sat down with the bank statements and a notebook and went back through 5 years. Every transfer, every G-cash, the dialysis, the tuition, the laptop, the fiestas, the godchildren, the store, the trike, the funeral, the house, $87,000, near enough. Out of 118, 31,000 left. At 50 years old, with a Canadian pension I can't touch for another 16 years. And I sat there in that kitchen with the calculator on my phone, and I recognized the man doing the arithmetic. Same fella from Grande Prairie, 2019. Handed over everything he had, rather than ask one uncomfortable question out loud. Different country, warmer, same silence. December 2025. I sat in that house on a Tuesday night with the calculator and the notebook, and I want to tell you honestly what rock bottom looked like, because it's not what these videos usually show you. It was a man at a table with a bowl of instant pancit Canton and a fan going, doing arithmetic he should have done in 2022. That's it. Nobody threw anything. Nobody left. There wasn't a scene. One didn't cry. I've cried twice in my adult life, and neither time was about money. The number was the number. 87,000 out of 118. About 31 left. And underneath that number was a smaller, worse one, which was, "This is the second time." That's the loneliness of it. Not being broke. Being 50 years old and having to admit you have exactly one failure mode, and you've now run it twice, on 2 continents, in 2 climates, with 2 entirely different sets of people, and the only common component in both incidents was you. I've worked on rigs where you get a repeat failure. Same fault, second time. And when that happens, nobody stands around theorizing about the weather. You stop looking at the hole. You start looking at the crew. So, what it cost me, all in, since you've come this far. The money you've heard, $87,000 in 5 years, and I'd like to say it was stolen. But every single dollar of it, I moved myself, with my own thumb, on my own phone. 4 years of not asking one question. That's the real bill. The money's just the receipt. My sister, Dana and I speak now, actually, since the funeral, a bit more. But I finally told her about the fund last Christmas, 6 years late, on a video call. And she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Mur, why didn't you just say?" And I didn't have an answer. That's not a thing you repair with an apology. That's a thing you rebuild by being different for about a decade, and I'm 11 months in. Nonoi doesn't speak to me. The store folded in about 14 months, which surprised nobody, and the trike got sold to cover something. And when he came around for a second go, I said no. First real no of my life, out loud, to a face. He hasn't spoken to me since, and neither has his mother. And there are people at that church who look at me differently now. That's the price. Nobody tells you the price of saying no is that some people simply leave, and you don't get to feel good about it. I still feel like a bastard about Nonoi, and I'd still say no again. And here's the part. 1, think a lot of you are going to hate. I'm still with Rosalie, 18 months on from that porch. Still here, still in the house. I know what that looks like in a video with a title like this one, and I've had 2 blokes at the hardware store tell me I'm a mug, and one of them was from that same table on the Alona Road, still there, still bitter, 5 years on, still right about nothing. But it isn't a fairy tale either, so let me tell you exactly what's different, and it's all mechanical. None of it is romantic. There's a number now. P22,000 a month, about 530 Canadian, to her mother for the household. Written on a piece of paper. Both of us signed it, which is a bit ridiculous for a domestic arrangement, but the signing was the point. It goes to one person. It gets reviewed every January. Everything else routes through Rosalie. If a cousin needs something, they don't come to Tito anymore. They go to her, and she says yes or she says no. And mostly she says no. And here's the thing that shocked me most out of 5 years in this country. More than the heat, more than the roosters, more than any of it. She's happier. She's happier saying no out loud than she was saying it in secret. For 2 years, she carried that job alone, in the dark, protecting me by managing me, and it was eating her. And I never noticed, because I was busy being a big, generous idiot. The day it came into the open, she got about 10 years lighter. I pay for Jomar still. He graduates next year. I decided that one myself, and I'll finish it. Kiko's 14 now, taller than his mother, plays on the covered court most evenings, and he calls me Tito, and there is no version of my life where I'm sad about that. The house is in her name. Always will be. I can't own land here. I couldn't then. I can't now. And no lawyer, no dummy corporation, no clever structure changes the Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. What I do have is a lease. 25 years, notarized, my name on it, done properly at an actual office in Tagbilaran, with an actual fee paid, which any lawyer will tell you is imperfect protection, and they're right. But it exists. It's on paper. It was an uncomfortable conversation, and I had it, in a room, with her, out loud, and that took me 5 years to learn how to do. So, what actually shocked me, after 5 years, not the culture. The culture was honest with me from day one. Utang na loob is real, it's not a scam, and it's a genuinely more decent way to be a family than the one I came from. I watched people with nothing feed a stranger off their own plates for 4 years running. Nobody hid it. Nobody lied to me about how it works. And the woman herself warned me. Year 1 in a kitchen, before I'd sent a single peso, she told me flat out, if you start, they will never let you stop. Not because they are bad, because they will love you. She was right on every count. And I heard it as a compliment. What shocked me is what I found underneath all of it, which is that I would rather lose everything I own than say one uncomfortable sentence to somebody's face. That's the whole thing. That's my entire life in one line. 26 years in a job where I was the calmest man in an emergency. And I could not tell my crew I'd lost my money, and I could not tell my sister, and I could not sit down at a table in Bohol and ask the woman I loved what the actual number was. 340,000 in Alberta, 87,000 here, $427,000, near enough to avoid roughly 4 conversations. So if you're 40-something or 50-something, and you've got a bit of money, and you're looking at this country with that warm feeling in your chest, I'm not going to tell you not to come. I'm still here, aren't I? Set the number in year 1. Say it out loud, to her, kindly, before you love anybody. Write it down. Review it once a year. And when the first uncomfortable conversation comes, and it'll come, dressed up as a hospital bill or a tuition fee or a house, have it. That's it. That's the whole guide. The rest is just what you can afford. You know, I came here so that nobody would know me. Took me about 4.5 years to work out. That was the exact same thing I'd been doing in a drilling camp for 26 years. Just warmer. And with better fruit. Same commute. Just longer. That was Murray, in Bohol, 51 years old, 5.5 years into a life he keeps saying he doesn't regret. We want to be careful about what we take from this one, because it isn't the usual story. Nobody defrauded him. There was no fake profile, no second boyfriend, no vanishing act. There was a family with a father on dialysis, and a son who wanted to be a nurse, and a large, kind, deeply conflict-averse Canadian who kept saying yes because saying anything else felt like an accusation. That's the trap, and it's a quiet one. Filipino family obligation is real, and it is not a scam, but it has no ceiling built into it, because it was never designed for someone with a Western bank balance and no ability to say no. The ceiling has to come from you, and it has to be spoken, early, before the money starts, while it's still a conversation and not a confrontation. Stories like Murray's are why we put that guide together. Everything we've learned from the men who've sat down and told us what went wrong, all in one place. It's in the description if it's something you need. Ask the hard question in year 1. It's the cheapest thing you'll ever do. Thanks for watching Inside the Philippines. Take care of yourselves out there.